Hello, I'm going to give you a short talk about action research. What is it and how to do it? So I have a small introduction here about the outline. So a small introduction and then what collaborative action research is about, conditions and tools for doing action research, and then we'll finalize with knowledge of different kinds that you can achieve through these processes. So, research in education and how to transform education. Education is about learners, and it's important to say that educators are learners. It's not just the students that's learning in school, the educators do as well. But what matters in education, and what we know from research, is that the teachers are the keys for, as agents in schools today. So, to transform education, we need to start with and focus on the practices of learners and teachers in classrooms. So start in your own practice and get to collaborate with other teachers and sometimes also with the researchers if you have these connections with a university nearby. And the third thing that's important is to create spaces for communication. So to transform education, we need to start in and focus on the practices of learners and teachers in classrooms. So action research is about actions. That you do something about what you are that doesn't work in your classroom. But it's also about research. And research is to get to know what happens if I do in this way or another way, a systematic way of collecting data to discuss and understand that. And through these processes, we reach a learning, and that's the learning, the teacher's own learning and how to improve their own practices in schools for student learning. So I usually use this kind of definition or frame of what action research is about, and that I used it from Karin Ronnerman's book Becoming Critical from 1986. And the first thing is that you improve aspects of your own practice. The second is to improve your understanding of your practice and then improve your understanding of the situation in which your practice takes place. So just make sure that you don't stop with the first, just improve aspects of your own practices. That's kind of just doing actions and actions and actions on one another. It's very important to get to the improvement of your understanding of your practices and also where these takes place. So just to illustrate with an image, we often talk about action research as a spiral of processes, and that you plan something, you act on it, and then you observe and reflect on it. And I have to apologize that some of these words are in Swedish, but it's just to get rid of the K and insert a C, you get the English one. So, but what is interesting when you talk about a spiral instead of a cycle is that you can never stop. This kind of a never-ending story to be an action researcher. And with a spiral, it also says you don't have to start to plan it. You can also start in observing something. It might be in the staff room. You sit together with your colleagues and you discuss something that you came up in your classroom, just the lesson you finished. And that can be the start of a reflection, and you think, oh, I have to do something about this, and then you go further into plan and action. So how can you then do these actions? So what I have found together with teachers for many years is that one way to do this is to sit together and create a mind map to identify what aspect to improve. And a mind map in this case is very simple. You just sit together and you start with asking one another, what are we doing here? What is our what are we doing in this classroom? And you just write that down around this. You start with a circle, it's your classroom, and then you just put other circles around and say this and this and this is done. It could be this reading classes, we have maths lessons, we have specifically maths on specific this or whatever it is. But to come to this little aspect that you want to improve, you have to then choose one of these circles around in your classroom and go on with another mind map, picking up these specific aspects, for example, in a maths lesson that you want to improve. And then after that, you agree that this is the things we want to change. You formulate a question to your practice starting with how. If you start with what, you kind of just end up with describing what it is. But if you start with a how, you end up with a question that you have to do something about. So out of that question, you plan for action. And the action can be something that you heard some other teachers have tried, or if you read it in a book, so you want to try it in your classroom as well and see how it works. But then it's the next step is to observe the actions. And observing can be done in two different ways. One is that you kind of talk to students or other teachers or staff in your school to get interviews, you have small conversations, or you just simply do a questionnaire to get their responses. The other way is to really looking what is happening, and that's through an observation. And I mean, the ultimate way to do that is via video or photos. But make sure you have ethical improvement of doing this, and you have that everybody has signed that if you're using these things like video cameras. When you collected data, let's say you keep your actions over 4 weeks or something, and then you pull all the data together and analyze it. And what is analyzing? So analyzing is to make sense of the data you collected. Very much when you do your activities in your classroom, you take it from your common sense, and I think this is good to do it in this way. But you might not know what the students think of it or your colleagues think of it. So this is the way to pull together the data and see what does it look like. Can I see a pattern here? Is there anything that's an anomaly that really is something else that I expected? And so these are the most important things to pick up and reflect. And then after that, you sit together with your colleagues and reflect over the results. And to make it public and to make other teachers be able to learn from what you are doing, it's important to document it in a small report for others to read. And the documentation has a double purpose. It's a one for you, it's for yourself to sum it up and get it together, but it's also to get others to read it. So for these discussions, it's you have to kind of organize or a communicative space. So taking part in that it's not a normal conversation you just do in the staff room. You have to be prepared of going into a communicative space. And I usually start a communicative space with a group of teachers by everyone clarify your own expectations. Because we all get into different in different spaces with different expectations, and that's really important that we know of. Another important thing is that we don't have to think alike. Things can be viewed from different perspectives, and these different perspectives can enrich the communications taking place. You can't come to a communicative space just with nothing. You have to be prepared. might have your own question you want to start your action out of. You have collected data, or you have done some analysis and to view the results. It's in a communicative space, it's important all voices to be heard. It's not one of the teacher cannot be speaking all the time. So if I facilitate such groups, I just keep track on time. It is important to be challenged, to be able to learn. Otherwise, it's kind of this. It become just a conversation where you feel safe. It's in your comfort zone. You have to be challenged, and specifically about these taken for granted statements. So it's important to put a why to one another, and but also be supporting processes of development, and then you can take this reflection, action, reflection. So if you come with your action and report on that, and the reflection would be on how you can go further with this analysis and document it. But the next time it can be, what kind of new actions are you taking on after these reflections? So that this is a never-ending action research. It's kind of ongoing. And then it's up to the school if you have a facilitator or researcher that attends. In our jobs, and we find that teachers are really good in facilitating this, and this is the term we use for middle leaders, to facilitate professional learning among their colleagues. So what is a communicative space? So in a communicative space, people interrupt what they are doing to ask, what is happening here? So it's a conscious and deliberate effort of participants to reach agreement about the language and ideas we use as basis to mutual understanding on one another's points of view and perspectives, in order to reach unforced consensus about what to do in a particular situation in which we find ourselves and in which we must act. So again, it's not about come to a consensus that we don't agree upon, and it is fine to have different opinions, but it has to be expressed, and we have to understand each other's different points in several matters. So just to think what things that action research can do that not other research can do. It is to create conditions for practitioners to understand and develop their practices from within, because you're part of this process yourself as a teacher, and as a teacher you know what have to be done. It's also to create conditions for practitioners to develop forms of action and interaction, allow practitioners to develop a communicative space so they can come together and take shared responsibility for their practices, create conditions for practitioners to transform the conduct and consequences of their practices. And not least, the last point is that you're not alone in doing these things. So there is as a way of understanding what is happening in this school. If you think of more than one teacher is doing their action research, and these teachers come together in a communicative space to discuss and reflect on what they're doing. To understand what is happening in an action research process, you can talk about different kinds of knowledge, and just to use an image of distance, to take a distance from what you're doing. So you can talk about the first self-reflection as a distance in first person, and that is something you can achieve by journal writing that you do after your actions. You do some own writing about and your own reflection, and that's when you read through this you can see, aha, that's something I've got, and that's a kind of a personal insight in what I'm doing. The second, the dialogue, you can talk about this in the second person. I have to, in these communicative spaces, I have to understand what you are saying, you have to understand what I'm saying. And within these dialogues, we can reach a kind of collegial knowledge. And I don't know if that's so much in Australia as it is in my country, in Sweden. That's something we talk a lot of for professional learning, and that's the collegial learning and collegial understanding. But the third step, you could talk about distance from a third perspective. And if we say just research, that maybe you think of a very objective research. But in this case, in action research, that is about your small report, that you put that together you document what you're doing, and to get out to other teachers and also researchers in this case, you can get a way to communicate what you have been doing, and others can raise questions to you that really makes you think again, oh, what was that? I need to consider that again. That was a good question to be asked. So that's a way to communicate your own action research with others. So just to sum up with a short summary. So action research is systematic inquiry. It involves collecting evidence. And the processes should also be manageable, site-based, meaningful and informative, and inclusive. So action research is not research that you do on top of your work. It has to be an integral part of doing your work. And I think that's very important, because if you put it on top of your work, it won't be done. So it has to be this ongoing activities that's ongoing, like the spiral, will never stop. I just would want to end up with this short quote, but which emphasizes small things. When you improve a little each day, eventually big things occur. Not tomorrow, not the next day, but eventually a big gain is made. Don't look for the big, quick improvement. Seek the small improvement one day at a time. That's the only way it happens, and when it happens, it lasts. Thank you.